Good morning. Good morning. This is the Checkin In podcast. Welcome to the 93rd episode. My name is Binyam. I'm a life recalibrator, helping you recalibrate your past so that you can rewrite your future. We are having a significantly later recording this morning. So it's still morning here. And yes, a far later recording due to an appointment with a plumber that was scheduled, and it went a little bit longer than anticipated. But I am glad to still be able to share a few moments for those of you who are able to join in today's episode. We usually record this at least 2 hours earlier than our current time today. But nonetheless, here we are, still doing our thing, 93 episodes in, and we are approaching that 3-digit mark with 100 episodes coming up most likely next week. So we need to do something special for that, I think. But in the meantime, let us catch up a wee bit with today's question. But before we do, let me just tell you a little bit about this podcast. This is the podcast that I devote on a daily basis, a weekday basis. And on this podcast, I devote to getting to be a better version of me. This is like one of my personal self-care practices every weekday morning, and I share it with you guys just as my way of saying, here's me being accountable to going through with it. And as I do it, also modeling for those of you who are on the same pathway with me, saying, how can we continue to fulfill some of the three parameters, those three pillars that we have on this podcast? Number one, awareness of ourselves, because, hey, I would say most of us don't know ourselves well enough. We think we do. We know what we want to look like, we know what we like, but we don't know who we are. And that's getting more at the heart of why I do this podcast. I want to get to know who I am. I want you to get to know who you are and what makes you unique, what makes you set apart in the unique way that you are. That takes work that we just don't coast into. And so that's one of my commitments. Second pillar is kindness to ourselves, because in our cultural dynamic, we are raised in a setting where we're very critical. We're very critical of others, but more so we're more critical about ourselves. So that's an important one. And then, of course, happiness. What does it look like to experience happiness as we go through all of the other emotions? Friends, I am thrilled you are here. Thank you for being part of this. Can I invite you on my Calgary podcast, Chick-fil-A? I would be delighted. Yes, you most certainly can. I would love to collaborate with you. So send me a message, either on the TikTok message where you're at there, or I've got some other ways that you can get in touch with me through that platform. I would be thrilled, though. Thank you for the invite. So happy Wednesday, happy hump day. We're at that point in the week. Tomorrow, Instagram is great too. Yes, Chick-fil-A. It's linked on my TikTok account. And of course, I'm live streaming currently on TikTok or Instagram as well as YouTube. Thrilled to have all of you guys on whichever platform you're on, even if you're listening to the recording either on the Instagram, the YouTube, or the Spotify account. Glad to have you guys join in. So what I basically do on this show here is I ask reflective questions. And as I ask those questions, I analyze those questions, considering the merits of how good it is. Great, loving the positivity. Thank you, Chick-fil-A. I appreciate you. Yes, so what does it look like to consider these questions? I look at the question. So instead of just diving right in, I say, why is this question worthwhile asking in the first place? What can I benefit from by considering answering this question? Is this a good question even in the first place to ask? And so I kind of go through that kind of analysis of the question as my way of saying, I want to add more flavor when I answer this question, because now I know the why for why I'm answering said question. So that's really important. And then I move on to answer the question for me in my own frame of reference, in my own experiences. I share that with you guys. I encourage you guys to engage as well. Sometimes we have dynamics where, as I'm about to answer the question, I get some great questions along the way. And so I answer other people's questions throughout the course of the podcast, which is totally fine. Totally fine, because I enjoy that collaboration. So today's question is as follows. To what extent do you let others control your decisions? To what extent do you let others control your decisions? This is one of those questions in the area of improving our relationships? An excellent question. As I even like look at it at the outset, I'm like, this is a good question to ask because it gets us in that awareness category, which is the first pillar, of course. And even as we consider that, it also moves us on to the kindness piece because I think if you're like me, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work. But let's look at the question first and foremost. The question again is, to what extent do you let others control your decisions? Now, I can answer this question and just dive right in, but the reason why I usually slow down to consider the question is because I want to consider how many ways I want to answer the breadth that the question covers so that I can learn more about me. This is my way of getting more aware of me in the process of answering these questions. Does that make sense? So, to what extent do we let others control our decisions? That's the question we're answering. Now, as I look at that question, it's almost implying that to some extent, almost every one of us lets others control our decisions, which kind of makes sense. I'm not sure if you agree with it or not. Hello, motivational. Nice to see you again. How are you? Welcome back. So, to what extent almost implies that every single one of us, to some extent, is impressionable. And I think I agree with that because not one of us who's listening to this podcast, in fact, not one of us on this world, I believe, can say we are a lone ranger. Not one of us can say, hey, I am a self made man. There's no one who has influenced me to be the person I am today. All of us came in the same way by way of being born. And as we were born dependent. We weren't born independent. We were born highly dependent on our parents, on our caregivers, on those around us who not only fed and nurtured us and clothed and housed us, but also gave us the value systems in which we now have taken on. So, along this way, it is almost like a maxim, I would say, in my frame of experience, that we going forward, we are highly dependent on other factors around us in a great level, in a great degree. It isn't really possible, I think, to be able to say, hey, I am unaffected by the decisions and the influences of those around me. I don't think it's possible for us to say that with honesty because we are almost learning on a moment by moment basis the things that we're going to sign up for by way of conviction. Do we believe this? Do we not believe this? And also how we're going to choose to live our lives. The very fact that we're choosing this one choice over other choices, again, lends to this idea that we have been influenced at some point along the way towards a certain pathway, towards a certain trajectory. Do you guys agree with that? Thomas, how are you, my friend? Good to see you again. So that's how I understand this question when it says to what extent. And I think that is an accurate reflection of how to answer or ask this question. To what extent? And that extent can be small or it can be great, depending on the individual and the kind of unique experiences we've gone through in life. For some of us, we may have some pretty amazing experiences whereby we're like, hey, I've learned how to become independent and I've learned how to live my life independent of the influences or the perspectives of others. Some of us have gotten to that point, but you weren't always at that point. You had to learn at some point how to implement some boundaries to get to such a destination whereby you're able to say, here's what I find compelling in life and here's how I want to invest or carry on the course of life that I have. And then there's others like myself who are far more familiar with a different context. The context that we're familiar with is whereby we, for years, if not decades, like my experience, have been highly dependent on the influence of those around us to a point that is almost, no, it definitely is unhealthy. And the word that I'm familiar with that kind of captures what I described there is there are many of us who are living codependently. Codependently, which means we're dependent on others to be able to give us our awareness of what's important and how we're going to carry on in life. That's been my experience for many years. So that's what I like about this question is that it says to what extent, and that extent is different for all of us. It could be a little bit, it could be a lot, or anywhere in between. It's a very subjective perception on our end of saying, how much am I still being influenced or controlled by the decisions of others? again, the question you're asking is, to what extent do you let others control your decisions? When I see the word let, something else that it gives me at Intel is it says that we're in essence taking our power, our ability to independently choose our choices in life, our perspectives, and we are letting others, we're giving control to someone else and saying, here, go ahead and take this and do what you will with it. To some extent, again, there's that, like amount of space there that we're giving to to the interpretation of extent. We are letting others, we are giving others, we're permitting others this access point to control our decisions. That's a very interesting thing, I find, when we do that. But I believe that we do it primarily because we've sort of been raised again to be highly dependent in a social economy on what others' perceptions, thoughts, or suggestions are. That's what it seems. At least that's what seems to make sense for me. So I'm hoping that you guys are tracking with my developing argument here. To what extent do we let others? So how much are we permitting others to control? And when I think of control, it doesn't have that good connotation, right? To control our decisions. How do others control our decisions? There's a variety of ways in which they do it. There could be just the very subtle glance that is like stern, saying, you really think that, or you're taking that course of action, like, that look, right? Have you guys had that familiarity when someone just kind of gives you that cue without saying anything that, that is kind of weird. That's kind of out of bounds, or that's different from my perception. And just that communication physically gives the cue that says, oh, I better line up with where this individual is suggesting I should. So that's an expression, a very subtle one, where we let someone else control our decisions because we are more sensitive to those cues that they're giving body wise. And as they do that, it's like oh, that is a tough thing, right? So that's what that looks like for some. For others, it's far more outright and explicit, saying, you can't be serious. You're not really choosing that decision, are you? What were you thinking when you like? There's just different ways of communicating that say, hey, I want to control your decision towards a certain end. Consider, for example, the media and the propaganda that sometimes comes across, or advertisers are masterful at this. They're able to take a really simple story or message and present it in such a way where they are really controlling your decisions. Mickey, nice to see you, my friend. Welcome aboard. That's one of the ways that we let others control our decisions, our convictions, our ideas by communicating in a certain way to change your perspective. Now, again, the question has a few different components here. We're saying there's an extent. For some, it's great. For some, it's minimum that we grant others, or we let others, we give permission to others to control what our decisions are. Now, in some contexts, let me just say this is an appropriate thing. For example, youngsters, babies, like those who need care and training, this is a legitimate process. They're being brought into existence in such a dynamic where they need to learn the appropriate process of growing to learn to make good decisions, to be able to have good practices or principles. And it's not that they were hardwired with that; they need to learn this along the way. And that's the story of every one of us from when we were born into our childhood. So that's important. And hopefully those influences are good. They're not always so, but hopefully they are good and helpful in helping one to be able to get to this destination that is actually good for them, that actually serves them really well. It doesn't always happen for everyone. You never mention how I say, oh, you never mention how I say hi, everyone. You're live. Well, Mickey, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being on this podcast this morning. It's a much later one, and it gives me a good chance to also see if this is more accessible, the live stream, at least the live stream component, for more of my followers. Because I know the other one, like when I usually do it earlier in the morning, it isn't the most friendly time for everyone per se. And of course, I've got everyone listening all over the world, right? And so, yeah, that's a tough one. You never mention how I say hi every time you're live. Mickey, I love that you say hi every time you're live, and I so appreciate it. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate you being a part of this think tank that we're in the midst of here. So, for those of you coming in, today's question we're answering this the self-reflection question that we're sort of analyzing in the moment is: to what extent do you let others control your decisions? To what extent do you let others control your decisions? This is a fantastic one because I've got lots to say about this, as has been evident for the last 15 minutes already. To what extent all of us do that in some sense, I believe, because we're social beings and we're in community. Do we let others, we give permission to others around us, control, have a say in our decisions? So, what is the ideal for those of us who are old enough to make our own decisions? The ideal is not to shut yourself off and say, nope, I'm not listening to anyone. No, the ideal, I believe, is how do we appropriately take input in from others as we try to figure out where we're going and what's important for us? That's the important part. I think there's a good balance that's necessary. It's not saying be completely 100% independent. No, it's another way of saying it, in my understanding, is how do you intentionally and carefully allow others to influence you? I'm always on the lookout for who I want influencing me, but that means I'm intentionally considering the influence others want to invest in me and saying, is this something that I find helpful or do I want to go a different direction? That means I need to know myself well enough to know what I appreciate and what I don't appreciate. That's how this sort of plays out for me. How do I acknowledge what that looks like? That's an important component. To what extent should we let our parents affect our childhood decisions? That is college, good, and bad friends. Mickey, that's a really excellent question. Oh my goodness, that's a really great question. So, for those of you who are still perhaps living under your parents' roof, for those of you who still maybe you're not even living with your parents, but they have tremendous influence in your life to be able to have a say on what you're going to study, what your career is going to be, who your partner in the future romantically is going to be, who your friends are going to be, like all those really important things. Great question, Mickey. Um, Let me see if I can answer it this way, Mickey. I believe personally that the job of all parents is to raise their kids up, not to be dependent, but to be independent. Okay. And I think that handoff of responsibility, where they have a say in your decisions, should start being uh, should start the relinquishment process as you get into your teen years. And why do I suggest just teen years? Because by the time you're teens, you're starting to develop your own ideas, your own personality, your own convictions about life. You've already been taught in the first 12 years of your life what's important as far as how much your parents wanted you to grow in a certain mold, what kind of person they wanted you to be, what kind of social skills to have, or how to engage with courtesy and kindness and all those other things that are necessary. But by the time you are in your teen years, from my definition, I would say you're almost like uh, an adult in training. And so, how can we start relinquishing independence towards teenagers to be able to start making their own decisions so they can practice and fumble their way forward, including all those things you're asking about, Mickey? So, I would say, with all the things that you're including, from what kind of friends to have, to what kind of life choices to make, to what kind of like all those really big decisions, you should already be having access to practicing what that looks like in your teen years, because as you're practicing those things, you're going to make mistakes along the way, but you learn from those mistakes. And when you're shielded from making those mistakes, you become more dependent instead of independent. So I think parents should be enabling their teens to start experiencing independence and relinquishing that control in their life so that they start practicing a lot of these things on their own and eventually become an independent, functioning member of society. And I think it's an unfortunate thing when I observe parents who are still making the calls for their children who are grown up, like into your mid to later teens and into your 20s and beyond. I think parents have no business in making those decisions. I think that's an unfortunate thing. That's really good advice. Thanks a lot, man. You're welcome, Mickey. So that's my perspective on what that should look like. That's an excellent question. I so appreciate it. But I think teens should start learning that independence. And for those of you who are in that circumstance, maybe it's cultural, because I know a lot of Asian cultures have that priority where the children for life are obligated to listen and follow the input of their elders. I know that's a cultural thing, but with respect, I would say I'd want to push back on that tradition because I don't think it's helpful. Hello, Grapefruit. How are you? And so I would suggest, with respect, for those of you who are in that dynamic, and I was there once upon a time too, where your parents are still holding a lot of the control and trying to um, tell you where they think you should be going and how you should be living your life. Here's what I would be saying. I would be stepping into a confidence zone with them, and I'm good too, Grapefruit. Thanks for asking. I would be stepping into this. This is going to take guts, but to step into this area of confidence, to sit down with your parents or whoever wants to control and have that conversation, saying, "I want to honor you for all that you've done for me in my life and teaching me and providing for me and bringing me up to this level. However, now I want to take the independence back and start making my calls for where I'm going to go in life." That's the important part, and to do that with kindness, with respectfulness, with graciousness, but with firmness. I think that's an important transition that needs to happen. Where can I watch the podcasts? Motivational. There are recordings of the video part on my Instagram and on my YouTube channels, which are linked to my TikTok, of course. That's where you can watch them. And then you can listen to it on Spotify under the same name, the Been Checking In podcast. Thanks for the question. So that's how I believe that for those of you who are stuck in this place where your parents or your caregivers or anyone else is controlling your life and making the decisions for you, I would suggest having that respectful conversation that's firm. You need to be firm. And for that firmness to take expression, you're welcome, motivational. For that firmness to take place, you need to be confident in your conviction of why you're doing this. That confidence that says, hey, I want to say thank you. I want to honor you for all you've invested in my life. But I also want to let you know that I have some ideas of where I believe I should be going in life. And I'm going to start taking that pathway going forward towards that destination. And this is me now respectfully taking the control back into my own life to fulfill what I think I am supposed to be fulfilling in my own course. That's a really important part. In the absence of that, you continue to be dependent or codependent in a way that's really unhealthy and unhelpful. So that's my thought. So thank you again for that question. That was a really helpful one for some of our audience. So I think it served well. That's why I love you guys' questions too, because I can only think in a certain track from my perspective or vantage point, but sometimes it takes another angle for me to say, oh, there is this other element here that we need to account for. So, to what extent do you let others control your decisions? For me, here's my answer. For decades, listen, for decades, plural, I have lived in that zone where I have willingly given up massive control to others. And so the amount or the extent that I allowed them was huge. It was significant. I basically premised my life off of giving this power and control to others and saying, what do you think I should be doing with my life? When someone said, hey, you'd be amazing at this, I'd be like, great, I'm going to sign up for that and commit my life to that. For someone else who is even merely suggesting and saying, here's what I think, I'd be like, all right, that's what I want to do. And so I'd follow that course of action and so on. And so I, yeah, it's only in the last few years that I've been calibrating with this expression in my life that has taken the form of me taking back control. Now, I've done this for the last decade or so, especially at home with my parents and so on, because they also came from a culture that definitely laid down expectations, even when you're into your adulthood, of what is the appropriate and right decision. It was very much control based, right? And I had to push back against that in incremental degrees. And for some of you who are in that zone, you may find that you'll have to do this incrementally because you're helping others calibrate with a new norm, right? And so that's really important. So, going forward now, though, for me personally, I'm far more aware of how I once used to give up massive control, and so I've started implementing measures in which I mitigate against that handover because it was me willingly handing over control to others. And that was driven primarily because I am a people pleaser at the very heart. I wanted to please others. I wanted to make them satisfied, fulfilled, and I wanted to gain their kudos. I wanted to gain their affirmation, saying, "Biniam, good job. That's what I live for." And so that was me handing off massive control to others around me and saying, "Yeah, by all means, whatever you think I should do, I'm on it. I'll do that to facilitate." Now, however, I'm in a totally different season. Now I'm along the season where it says, nope, I'm far more aware of who Biniam is and how I want to go forward in the future and what I want to experience. I'm far more aware of what I'm made to accomplish. And even though I can acknowledge people's affirmations and suggestions, that's all they are. It's like I'm considering it, but I'll at the end make my own decision. Motivational says, how does someone bring up a conversation with a partner who doesn't make the other one feel loved? Good question, my friend. Good question. How does someone bring up a conversation with a partner who doesn't make the other one feel loved? So I'm guessing you want to talk about that way that you're feeling, right? I'd want to say it in this way: always lack of effort and communication. They would always feel like the other person is being needy. Gotcha. Communication is a really important part, but I think in this case, motivational, especially with the sensitivity of what you're talking about there, I'd want to approach it with sensitivity. Sensitivity along this line, saying, always speak from your perspective. Speak with generosity in giving them the benefit of the doubts. These are just perceptions on your side, right? But motivational, this is just what you're perceiving or experiencing. It may not be the real reality, though. Then they may be thinking something else that you don't have access to. So along those lines, I would be coming along and saying, how can I, one, be gracious, speak from my perspective, and give generous benefit of the doubt, saying it might just be me, but may I share with you some perceptions and how they are making me feel. When you present it this way and when you open it up this way, you're giving them a space where they can rebut and say, actually, that's not how it meant to make you feel. And it's not like you said you were doing this. You're just saying, it seems this way. This is my perception. I could be wrong. But I want to acknowledge all the good things that I appreciate about our connection here. There's some beautiful good things, and I would go into colorful details saying, I love this and I appreciate this. But here's what my perceptions are. When this and this and this happens, here's how I feel. This is just my perception. Could you give me some insight into what's going on your side? Because I don't know what it looks like from your side. Could you give me some intel on your side of how to think about going forward here? And so that's an important part. So I would introduce it this way, motivational, to again be firm in going through with it. So there's confidence piece that needs to happen there. Affirming them and saying, I love X, Y, and Z about you. I have a perception that is troubling for me, and the perception is just my own. And I want to say I could be wrong on this one here, because from what I know about you, and you mentioned in your affirmations, you're a beautiful person. But could you help me think through this? Because this is how it makes me feel. That's how I'd probably suggest navigating that conversation. Was that helpful, motivational? Sometimes it takes guts to have those uncomfortable conversations, but it's really necessary because communication is a really important piece. But in communication, there can be very harmful ways of communicating where you're like, you did this, you're a piece of this, and all that kind of stuff, which is unhelpful. That's not communication. No, the constructive communication is one where you continue to treat this person with respect, with care, with concern, even as you're forthright with what's going on. And that means always speaking from your perspective and giving them generosity in the area of giving the benefit of the doubt. Friends, I would say now, motivational says, I would have never thought of it that way, but honesty, best advice. Honestly, the best advice, and yes, this will avoid arguments. Fantastic. I'm glad I could help you, my friend. Wishing you well. I'd love to hear how that goes. The heart of me answering my question, to what extent do you let others control your decisions? Where I'm at now personally, friends, is this. I'm in a season of life now where I acknowledge I'm going to be influenced by those around me, by you, by me. You're amazing. Thank you. My pleasure, motivational. But for me personally, I'm acknowledging that I'm already going to be influenced by those around me, but I can control who's going to influence me, which means I need to know what I value. Those who bring influence in my life that I don't value, I'm going to keep them at arm's length if I can, if I'm impressionable, or I'm going to influence them. And I feel I can do that because I have a strong one, right? Hello, Brandon. Good to see you, my friend. And so I'm aware that I'm going to be influenced. I'm just very careful of those who are going to influence me because I want good influences in my life. And that's probably what I encourage you to do alongside me. How can you identify those individuals in your life to whom you want to give that control, not to make your decisions, but to influence you so that you can make better decisions? That's how I think that. It's been episode number 93, guys. Been a blast. Thanks for joining in. I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow for episode 94. Have a great Wednesday.